of them, one of them is to look at your own communication and say, how much are you sending out push communication? You're writing general messages for your people, whether they're your staff, they're your clients, they're your stakeholders. You're sending out generalized messages rather than one-on-one messages. It's very easy to fall into the one-to-many trap because it's quick. And you think you're being really effective because you say, I'm sending out this communication, I'm being really clear, but it's being received among lots and lots of other push communication. And the likelihood is that it's going to get lost in confusion. It's going to be one of many, and it's not going to register in the way that you think. So if you do a little analysis of how am I communicating, and you find that you're doing a lot of generalized message sending, stop and ask yourself, is this the best way for me to behave right now? Is this the best way for me to communicate? It's easy for me, but it may not be meeting the needs of my people. If I think about that, what are those needs? And I would come and say, again, from the conversations I've had, people need a lot of reassurance at the moment. They need to know that they matter to you. There's a lot of fear around job loss. There's a lot of fear about, have we got a sustainable business model given that the world has changed so much? Are we facing bankruptcy? Because we know that supply chains, all the normal business patterns have been disrupted. Do we have sufficient liquidity to survive if there really is, if this is going to go on? How long is it going to go on? How long am I going to be in this environment that I didn't choose? What does my career look like? This is slightly further out, but what does my career look like now, given that we know the opportunity for employment is shrinking? The US has now got the highest unemployment figures it's had since the Great Depression. There are countries, I can speak of Oman because I know it, where there is no help whatsoever for the SME environment. No one is getting help, and there is no cash, there is no cash flow. So people are going to the wall because they just don't have the liquidity to survive. I'm talking to you from Rwanda. Here, the lockdown has been incredibly well managed. It was total. It's been in place for now, I think, 4 weeks, and it's going to run for another 2 possibly. And there are all kinds of people on the poverty line who have no money. The government is distributing food. There's a real risk of starvation. There's a real fear among the people receiving food that that's being distributed unfairly, that they're being deprived. There are people who aren't able to pay for basic services like rubbish collection, who feel that they are being unfairly discriminated against. They can't pay, it's not their fault, they have no money, and they fear that they now risk secondary, if you like, secondary disease and so on from unsanitary situation. There's a real fear that all of the security guard services will go rogue and start to rob and steal to support their families because they are out of income. So suddenly, this very stable country is back to the conditions that generated a genocide 26 years ago. Unimaginable 6 weeks ago that Rwanda could be facing radical instability. So the point of telling all of this is to recognize that nothing is the same. People are anxious. They genuinely have no idea what the future holds. And they're beginning to have, if you like, wild plans because all of this communication is suggesting that the world is out of order. If you want to hold people, you want to create trust, you want to create stability, you have to talk to everyone one-on-one. You have to take the time to really go out and say, tell me how you're feeling. Tell me how you're experiencing this. Tell me the help you need to do your work. Tell me where you have problems. Come back to me if anything is blocking you. You have to make yourself available in a way that you probably have never done before. So you need to plan your time differently and say, I have to speak to everyone at least at the very minimum once a week, one-on-one, possibly once every day, once every 2 days, depending on how people are responding to the situation they find themselves in. If someone says, I'm feeling very anxious, I'm very destabilized, I'm finding it hard to focus, you probably need to speak to that person at least once a day to give them the support they need, the structure they need, the grounding they need to be able to function. If someone says, I'm loving it, I'm really loving this, I'm worried about the external environment, but as for my work and where I find myself now, no problem, then that's someone that you can probably talk to once every other day, once every 3 days. My last thing here is you need to do this one-on-one. If you're having team meetings through a mechanism like this one, what are we on? Zoom. It's great because at least people can see each other, but it's hard to hold attention in this environment. People are used to multitasking. They will be fiddling with their phones, they will be doing something else, the children will be running in the background. There's a chaos around. People are in an environment where they have little control and they get easily distracted. So meetings in this environment are not going to have the same anchoring effect. They're not going to have the same glue, if you like, as meetings face to face. So you have to recognize that. And you have to keep these meetings short, because the longer they run, and we're going to try and be short on this one, the more people's attention wanders, the less they remember. And one last thing for you to maybe be aware of is, in an environment where you're communicating, you're speaking, so meetings are generally around speaking and listening, people only hear 25, they only take in 25% of what you're saying. In this environment, it's probably 10%. So you're working in a digital environment where there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of, if you like, disruptive traffic, and you have to work harder to create the conditions of safety, security, trust, effectiveness for people to do their work. So that's the end of the first section. It went longer than I thought. But if anyone has any questions, that would be great. We can take them now. You can either write them or indicate. Have you taken back control, Amima?
Sorry, I just gave it back. I had to, I lost something, so I give it back now. You have, you're on.
So if I'm not quite sure how this works. So how do I know if someone's asking a question?
Anybody wants to ask, well, just, so Slim, go ahead. Go ahead, Slim.
No, just I want to say, if anyone wanna have a question, he will raise the hand, and you or Umayma will see it, so you can give them.
And then they can unmute themselves to ask. Sure.
So if anyone has a question, press the raise your hand button and I will invite you to speak.
Or just unmute and just raise your hand and screen and just go ahead, ask a question.
In a way to prompt that, maybe, because it may be difficult for people to step up. Has anything of what I said surprised anyone? Is this something that you've been aware of in your own leadership practice and response to these unusual circumstances?
I think maybe Anas,
I'm
go
either being
ahead.
Brilliant.
Yes, Richard. No, actually, what you said is absolutely true. It's not a surprise. but probably you have put it in a way that is very structured and organized, and to make us actually think and reflect on how to cope with these new circumstances that we have to deal with, as you said, without actually our choice. So it's not a surprise, but probably we spoke, me and you, earlier, and I told you about my situation is probably a little bit different. I'm not managing people remotely. I'm supposed to deliver training, soft skills training remotely, and this is, you know, the challenge, because I'm moving myself from the classroom environment where we have these group works and activities, and now I'm trying to make sure that I'm delivering, you know, the value of this training online, and it's a little bit concerning me. So yeah, I'm anxious to put all these things together in order to see what is the best way actually to deliver training online. This is totally new to me.
So this format is, I'm not happy in the digital environment. I'm
Me
a
neither.
troglodyte. I'm not a digital native. So we're all learning new skills in a way. And the point is that the leadership practice that you have has also got to change. So it's not just you have to master some new technical skills. You have to say, I have to talk to people differently if I'm going to have impact with them. And the core of, in my view, the core of leadership is creating trust. It's creating this closeness with people where they're willing to take risk. Because if they trust you, if you trust them, if you're in this together, then you'll take risk in a different way. If you don't trust each other, you take less risk, and you probably fall into disaster because you're doing so much checking of each other. You're not actually thinking about where are there other risks. When you trust each other, you tend to say, we know there are going to be problems, but we will face those, and together we will overcome them. So you have to build this trust in a new way in this environment. If you don't, your team is not going to function in the way that it used to. It's going to be ineffective. And you'll find that you're then facing a series of problems with your clients, with your suppliers, with everyone around you, because something has changed and you're unaware of it. And that will unravel very quickly. And the reason that this matters at this moment is if the old structure of getting payment in, making things happen is changing, and you will be one of the organizations that fail. So your leadership now matters more than it's ever mattered. This is where the leadership that you bring is absolutely required. It's absolutely vital. You are the person that can make a difference between success and failure. And it comes down to, how do I talk to my people? How do I hold that trust? How do I create safety so that we know what we're doing? And I'm just going to repeat, it takes time. You have to plan in a lot more time for this one-on-one communication and double checking, giving feedback, because if you don't, things will go wrong and you will fail. Any other questions or comments on that? I'm aware that we're running wildly over time, so I will try and proceed to the next section. I'm going to encourage you to be ready to ask questions at the end. So this next section says there is a leadership toolkit that means you can create team spirit, motivation, and innovation. And we can come back to that toolkit in greater depth, maybe in another talk. It works both in the face-to-face and the online environment. And this is about really helping people to understand why they're doing what they're doing. to become aware and self-reflective, aware of the way they are behaving, the way they're communicating, what they're telling each other, the confidence that they're inspiring, so that they become aware of the environment in which they're swimming. If you're a fish in water, you probably tend not to notice the water. You take it for granted. This is a way of saying you have to always be aware of the water, the environment that you're swimming in, and you have to be aware of the way in which you're creating ripples through that water, how you are moving through it, and the way you move creates disturbance or vibration or awareness or impact on others. So in this environment where you're having to spend a lot more time with individuals, you want to be asking questions like, not only tell me how you're feeling, tell me how you're working, tell me where your anxieties are, tell me where your fears are. When you think about next week, what dominates your thoughts? You want to structure questions that are allowing people to really be honest with you. Tell me where your difficulties are. You also want to be asking questions like, so things have changed. How do you feel about what you're doing now? How does it matter to you? What's changed in the way you think about your priorities? What's changed in the way you think about your motivation? Because remember that statistic, again, from the UK, if 85% of people are basically in some way dissatisfied with their working life, you can bet your bottom dollar that more than 75% are going to be struggling with what's going on. Why am I doing what I'm doing? If you've got, in the UK, they have this term now, people are on furlough. These are the people who've been told, don't report into work, they're going to get some government assistance, and we will resume sometime after the lockdown. You still want to be contacting those people to say, tell me how you're experiencing this strange furlough, this not working. Tell me what that's done to your motivation. Let me understand that. Tell me what's happened to your sense of purpose, because you need to be holding people to be able to bring them back to effectiveness when things, when lockdown changes, when people are allowed to meet and work again in the same social space. If you don't know what's been going on in those people's heads, when they come back, you're going to have a team that has basically fallen into dysfunction and it will not perform. So you have to recognize, no matter what condition your people are in, you have to be there with them and they have to trust you. All of this is so you're building trust again. You're building trust in this environment that is very illusory. It's all about perception. You've got to be breaking through that to say to people, I'm here for you. You are not alone.
Something that the
Count on me. Yes. Can you hear me? Someone
Yes, we can
asked
hear
a
you. I guess
question.
somebody came in and they did not mute their mic.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So you just have to make sure that you're creating this sense of stability and trust. It's a new level of trust. You have to take people into a much deeper level of trust than existed before. If you do that, your team will come back and will perform, and you will be one of the organizations that succeeds. You also have to encourage people to think about how, if you like, they're learning from this change situation, because sometimes you need to really reflect back to people that they're doing remarkable things. They're coping, they're being resilient, they're evolving, if you like. You may have new ways of working in the future because you say, we've now learned that we can balance some home working with some office work. We don't have to go back to necessarily the same structure as before. It may be that you say, actually, we've learned a greater level of trust with each other, because if before we were clocking you in and clocking you out, we were in effect measuring you on the amount of time you were in the office. We're now able to say, we're measuring you on your output. We're measuring you on your impact. We're no longer so concerned about policing you. We're much more concerned with supporting you. So you can reflect on the way in which this disruption is creating positive change in your organizational culture. But for that to be real, for people to trust it, you have to build that trust. And the only way you're going to build that trust is by asking those questions and really listening to the answers, and then thinking about how you design your interventions, your meetings with your team, so that you're bringing people to the same place. They're on the same page, they're saying the same things, they're committed to the same purpose, and they know they can achieve because you're helping them to sort all the things out that they can't sort out on their own, so they never feel alone. And the last thing to say here is that when people feel alone, when they feel isolated, when they feel they've got no support, this is when the depression, the destruction sets in. This is when people start to lose their grip and become ill. They get stress, they get suicidal, and so on. And again, I'm saying this because you have to recognize that the external environment is basically one that makes you suicidal. There is no good news at the moment, or very little. There's very little that's reported. So you've got to be the anchor that says, I'm here for you. You are not alone. And together we can achieve anything. We can come through this. We have together the toolkit, the thinking, the resilience, the companionship to do things in a new way. We can innovate and we can succeed. That's got to come from somewhere. It's got to come from you. And any questions on this section or any comments?
I think if someone can share an experience that's specific at the moment, because if we can anchor what you just said to an example, maybe it'll...
That would be great.
Yeah, so maybe somebody who's experiencing something at the present moment with leadership. I think Adur had started talking earlier about something, but anybody else is welcome to share. Go ahead, Adur. Just unmute yourself, please. There you go.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we are all the time talking about creating trust and confidence with our clients and stakeholders. And from my experience in my field, I felt that it is so important to have a physical contact with the clients, to go and meet them in their headquarters in the countries. And so far, I think that the business was depending a lot on that personal touch. Now, with all this new situation, maybe we will have to combine that with online meetings. Do you think, Richard, that this balance between the importance of having physical meetings with the clients and the online meetings is going to change? And how do you have
I would say
advice?
it's a really good question. I think if you're creating a new relationship, you want to meet face to face. Ideally, you want to go to your client or your supplier's environment because it will tell you a lot about them. And when we meet face to face, we create confidence in each other in a very different way to when we're doing it remotely. So I think to really build a basis of strong trust, it's best to meet face to face. If you think about where you are right this minute, probably most of the people you're working with, you've met face to face. So you can say, I don't have to worry about that. What I have to do now is say, we can't meet, but we know each other well. This is how, and you have to agree with them the best way that you can manage this separation. How are you going to talk with each other? How are you going to make decisions? How can you use this to maybe explore new ways of doing things because you're being forced to? But if you say, at some point, I want to get new relationships, new clients, new suppliers, then I hope we'll be back in the situation where we can meet face to face. In the world that is coming, we'll reflect on that in a minute. Conditions are going to change. People are going to be much more aware that there are reasons to change the way we've been doing things. We're aware of climate impact now. So if you've been used to flying around the world for these meetings, you might say, which meetings are essential? I've got to reduce my travel. I've got to reduce my carbon footprint because we can't afford the climate impact. I'm aware, I know that now. We've been talking about it before, but I didn't really understand it. I now see what happens when you have an exponential trend hit the wall. This is what COVID-19 is. It's showing us what an exponential trend is. It's bringing it right into our faces, into our homes, into every aspect of our life. And when you sit down and you say, so what other exponential trends are out there? There are so many in the climate environment. There are so many in the food safety environment. There are so many in the social equity environment. We're facing the largest array of exponential curves that are hitting the wall. And we now know that we've got to flatten. This is what COVID-19 is teaching us. If you want to survive, you have to flatten the curve, and we have no time. COVID-19 is also showing us we have no time. You have to flatten this curve in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The longer you leave it, the harder it is to flatten. The more people are going to die or be terribly affected by what's going on. The consequence of COVID-19 right now is another one of those exponential trends. People are going to find that their lives have changed. They didn't choose it. For some, it's going to be incredibly difficult. I've lost my livelihood. I've lost my sense of security. I've lost my pension. I've lost family members unexpectedly. I'm grieving and I feel desolate. There are going to be a huge array of consequences. We have to hope our governments recognize that and change their policies. But if they don't, we are going to have to really sit down and say to people, so now we know this exponential thing, what else is coming and how do we respond to it? How are we going to be ready to react in ways that say, we're not going to go through this again? So choosing your meetings is going to be one of the things that you have to think about very carefully. And it may be that the meetings that you have face-to-face, you say, this meeting has to be different. We're now meeting to create the basis of trust and communication, to agree the way in which we're going to make decisions in a distance environment so that we can operate without having to meet again. And the only reason we will meet again is if there is a crisis which we can't resolve in the distance environment, because you will always achieve a better result if you're face to face. Does that answer your question? So I wouldn't stress at the moment about saying I've got to meet everyone. Just say I can park that will come back. But when I think about planning my role, how I've been working in the past, what was I doing in the last 6 months, 12 months? How do I change that now so I'm flattening the exponential curve, the exponential rate in other areas? You've got to change. And you've got to explain to people that you're changing because they will respect it. they will respect you for it. And your change will encourage them to think about what they need to change to mirror what you're doing. We're now in an environment where people are talking about responsibility. I'm self-isolating, not because necessarily I'm fearing that I might die, I might get COVID-19. I'm doing it to create safety for vulnerable people who, if I don't do this, are really at risk of dying because we could be transmitting a disease that is fatal to them. So we're aware that we've changed our behavior to benefit people that we don't necessarily know. And you can explain, I'm not going to come for meetings like this anymore because I want to avoid the disaster that will come. We know it's going to come. We've seen how it comes with COVID-19 if I don't change this. So people will really respect you for making those new decisions and encouraging them to think about what they can do in their environment to mitigate this exponential risk. Okay, any other questions, observations? Thank you for that, it was fantastic. I'm sorry I talked too much. If we're happy with that, and I'm aware we only got 10 more minutes, so I'm wildly behind time. Sorry about that, chaps. So the next question is the ways in which you can close distance with clients and stakeholders to resolve issues. We've just in a way talked about that in terms of setting up new relationships. Here, and this is really important if your business is going to survive, you have to really talk to every client that matters to you, and preferably every key client, every medium client, all the 80% or the 20% of clients that produce 80% of your business value, you absolutely must talk to and say, how are we going to work together to come through this? This may only be a strategy for 4 weeks, or we may be actually planning a completely new relationship because we want to change how we're interacting with each other. But again, you need to set the time for that, and you need to say to people, I'm having this conversation, I want this conversation because we're reframing our relationship, we're reframing the assumptions on which we've been working. And I want to take time with that, because if we explore those assumptions deeply, we may find that we can innovate. Some really powerful business advantage may come from this, but we have to take this conversation, we have to give it space, and we have to take it seriously. It's not a contingency plan, it's not a bandage for the next 4 weeks. We're really looking at how do we use this to discover things that we haven't thought about before. Our assumptions were wrong. We were doing things in ways that relied on an environment that no longer exists. What does that tell us about the way we need to work with each other now? How can we be reliable for each other? If I'm anxious about your cash flow and that you might be going bankrupt, how do I be clear and honest with you about that so we can create the ability to carry on working? You have to really bring to people, your clients, your suppliers, and your stakeholders, this thinking, because if you don't, again, things will fail. Any questions on that? So you've really got to, the takeaway is you've got to structure in a lot of time to talk to these people, not email them, not this one-to-many. You've got to say, I'm calling, I want a small meeting to talk about these principles. We have to understand what's changed in our assumptions so we can change what we're doing, both to innovate, be effective, and survive. If we don't, we will fail. Anything there? I thought you were all going to be far more interactive. So the last one is about, if you like, reflecting on yourself and saying, if I've got to create
Richard,
all of, yes?
So I think Nema has something to say.
Yeah, fantastic.
Nema has something to say.
I can't see these hands. I can't.
Can you see everybody on the screen though?
No, I've got a little list of names. I can see he's got a muted mic, but nothing else.
Okay, if you look up on the right side of your screen, you might see speaker view and or something about the view on the right side of the Zoom screen.
I'm looking.
On the right up, yeah. It says speaker view, and then there's. Well, anyway, it's okay.
You intervene and tell people to speak.
Okay, I'll do that. Nema, go ahead. Can you
new
unmute?
ways of working.
No worries.
Yeah, okay.
Nema, go ahead.
Sorry to cut your flow. Yeah.
Hello.
Go ahead,
Hi,
Nema.
hi, Richard. Yeah,
Hi.
the concern, I have actually two questions. Like, I just wanted to check with you if you know any best practices. I know it's too early, but is there any best practice in view for a remote working arrangement wherein, you know, as a leadership, you can check on your employees if they are okay? Because we are all dealing with something quite unprecedented. So it's easy to miss out on a lot of things, like somebody's suffering. So is there something, you know, like a check that you can do so you don't miss out on it? And the second worrying thing is that now with this situation, a lot of companies are going to be stuck with the cash flow. So when you advise your client, like you are in the middle of a project and you know contractors you have been working with and you want to recommend, but whether it is in Spain, Italy, India, Turkey, we don't know what is their condition right now, whether they'll be able to deliver it. And we cannot blame them because we had a robust relation, but this is something nobody had braced themselves for. So what is a precaution as somebody who's recommending to the client can do?
Yes. So I'm going to answer your first question very briefly. In the late 80s, I'm significantly older than most of you. I had a role where we were suddenly expected to I managed teams across the world in 40 countries. And we were expected to, we got rid of some of the layers of management intermediaries. And the idea was that I would manage 40 teams in 40 countries on my own, an assumption. So there's nothing new in learning how to distance work and how to really create this sense of unity and purpose. And I'm going to say it comes down to this structuring in these calls. You have to speak to people in this one-on-one way. You have to reorganize your meetings so that they're smaller, they're shorter, and you have to ask lots of questions. Many meetings are run on the assumption that one person is speaking and lots of people are listening. In this environment, you have to say, I want you to ask questions. Sometimes we may not try and answer the question, we just need to know what the questions are. So you've got to change the way in which you're meeting and talking. And you can say, if we know the questions that are in our mind, we can then organize to solve those questions in smaller groups, because that will be more effective. You're going to spend less time if you do it that way than if you try and run a meeting in the way you're used to. So you've got to completely change the way in which you're, if you like, you're collaborating. You've got to get rid of hierarchy and say we're working as peers. We're working closer together, and we're asking a lot more questions. And we don't have to answer all the questions in a meeting. We just have to ask the questions. And you want to run a meeting in a way that says, I've got an agenda, but it's an agenda with questions on it. I'm going to ask a question. If I want someone to say specifically, what's your cash flow situation? You've got to be honest. You've got to be brutal. You've got to say, we don't have time to have confusion. I've got to drop the politeness. I've got to ask really direct questions, and you've got to give me an honest answer. So you're creating a new environment. You're changing the culture because it's the only way that you can manage all of this at a distance. And your second question was this environment where there's more uncertainty, there's more fear that projects are going to fail, you're not going to get paid. things are going to go wrong. I think it's the same principle. You have to say to people, I'm coming to you, I need to know your situation. I'm not coming in a blame way. I'm not coming in a way that is fearful. I'm coming to you to say, I need to know your reality. Because if we know each other's reality, we can deal with it. And I know we're working in an environment where all of this perception, all of this illusion, all of this surface is going on. I want to cut through all of that so I absolutely know what's going on. I want to know what matters to your business. I want you to tell me where your risks are so I can think about them and manage them from my end. So we're not creating more risk from each other for each other. We're mitigating it. We're reducing it. And that takes courage. It's quite hard to say to someone, are you going to pay me? And you've got to change the things from saying, I'm demanding payment, to say, I know it's difficult. Tell me what your plans are to come through this. Because then you can say, I believe in that. I'm going to put my focus where there's more uncertainty. There are other people who are at more risk of not paying me, or whatever the issue is. You've got to reprioritize. Does that answer the question?
Kind of, but still, I think it's just a starting.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's a heads up.
If you're interested, I think we won't go any further. I'll throw this out now. If you're interested, we could run a talk a week, and I lay out to you, if you like, the toolkit, so that you can really understand the mechanisms that exist to make you that enable you to cope in this environment. So you can really drive your leadership in a way that is going to make a difference for the people who depend on you. I'm very happy to do that. This is really a framing that says, if you don't recognize that you have to change how you're behaving, you have to change some of your assumptions, then you're going to fail. There's a lot of talk about what is the system going to look like, the economic system, the social contract after COVID-19. And there's a lot of speculation about the countries that are going to fail, because some countries are going to fail, and the countries that are going to succeed. And this is coming from all the kind of think tanks, the business schools and so on. There's nothing necessarily new here. People have been thinking about these exponential trends for a long time. It's just we're now aware of them in a way that all of them together in a way that maybe we haven't been, and we know they're real. People have talked about them in the past as though they're theoretical. Now we know that they're converging. There is a kind of convergence point, and we've got to face this reality. Here, if you recognize that all of this is happening, you say, I'm looking at this to change what I'm doing, how I'm thinking about things, because that then changes how other people are behaving. And the point is, we're creating safety. This is how we create safety. And we have to be safe. We can't function in environments where we feel unsafe. It's a basic human condition. If I feel unsafe, all I'm doing is thinking about my survival. I can't do anything else. If I feel safe, I can think about a great deal more, and I'm open to changing. If I feel that unsafe, all I'm going to do is protect myself. You just can't choose to behave in any other way. So if you want that, I'm very happy to lay out every week. Here's a tool. Let's talk about what this tool tells you. How do you adopt this tool? How do you place it in your own work context? And we can literally build up a community where we start sharing our experience. Amima said, let's hear the stories. So you learn from each other. You're all in an unprecedented situation. It's going to last at least 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. whether lockdown changes, you're still going to be dealing with the impacts of it. So we can say, let's create a real community here where we have a language and a toolkit in common, and we can therefore talk about what we're experiencing, what we're learning in ways that help each other. I'm very happy to do that. And beyond that, if I've designed a program to say, here's a 15-hour program which we can do online that really takes you through that and allows you to drive your own business change. So that's slightly different. That would be a structured piece of learning that says you're being given a tool, you're being encouraged to use it, and then we learn what's going on in your business environment so that you can adjust. Very rapid learning. I'm happy to do both of those things. I think I've ended it, Mima.
Is that the last part?
Yes, I think that I've just, because we're running out of time.
I think that Demeter, no, it's fine. I think we can go more for about 15 minutes or so. Demeter has a question for you. Go ahead, Demeter.
Richard, thanks for the great talk. So I have many questions, which is the usual, but
thank God.
I'm keeping it. I keep quiet so there is more space for others. But two questions. I was, maybe three. Two are more about psychology, because you are saying you should be very frank. We should be very direct. Hit the point and so on. First, as a person who spent 5 years in Germany and Austria, and then 5 years in the Middle East, I came from the German hitting the spot, which is actually so direct that when I worked with British people, I was annoyed with them speaking, like being late to a meeting. I'm talking about real consultant we had, and talking about how his car broke and I don't know, and we paid the guy per hour. And in the Middle East, I got people hanging the phone when I call and I say, can I speak with Mr. This and That related to this and that project? I'm calling from that company. And they say, he's always busy, which is very common with any manager in the Middle East. He's always busy. And at the end, they literally stopped hanging the phone. And they just like, bam, they don't stick with me. When I say it's urgent, can you let me through? And my colleague said, we go there. And I said, we have to warn them we are going there. And she said, no, we just go there. And we went there and we waited half an hour, and the guy was not that busy. And we had karak and water and Then we asked him, he spoke for another 30 minutes about his belief about the world and so on. So I'm going to keep it short. But there are environments and cultures where you cannot be straight. You cannot tell people the bare truth, and you cannot be fast and short. Is there a solution? And I don't want to say Middle East or any other. Sometimes you deal with people who actually cheat and lie, and you are stuck in a project where some of your stakeholders are like that. Like I was working on a construction site just up to a few weeks back, where the contractor, they were cheating all the time, and everybody knew that, because they bid on a price which is impossible. And that's how they won the project. Even the client knows that they bid it on an impossible price, but we as a consultant were still supposed to make them deliver. So how you deal with that? This is so many things don't work in what you are saying. It's,
So the first thing is to recognize we have to be culturally appropriate. You're absolutely right. People, in Holland, in the Netherlands, people are so blunt, it can be painful. You have to learn to listen, because if you understand the culture, people are always actually telling each other what's important. It just comes across in different ways. So, you know, in the Middle East, it may sound like people are scaling, but if you say, I understand why people are telling me what they're telling me in this way, you can still come to, I get the point. Here, what you have to do is create, again, it's your leadership that has to do this. You have to say to people, we're facing a crisis. Unless we work out how we're going to deal with this crisis together, we're both going to lose. This is a lose-lose situation. The only way we're going to come through this crisis is in a win-win situation. We've both got to find the way that we survive. We come out of it where our working relationship is better and we can solve problems really, really quickly. Because if we don't, we both lose. That's what I mean by getting to the point where you say, we have to put on the table that this is the crisis point. This is where we live or die. And we've got to make sure our relationship is one where we live. We both have to win. We both have to live. If you fail, I won't survive because your work is important to me. We're in these interconnected delivery chains now. We're in work modes, supply chains, whatever, where we're all crucial to each other. And at the moment, that whole system is at breaking point. If you can get that clear, then you have to say to people, we now need to be honest about what our concerns are, where you might fail or I might fail, because then we can address them. And you do that in the culturally appropriate way. So in the Middle East, it may be that you say, this conversation is going to take a lot longer than it would in the Netherlands. And I've got to be ready for that, because if I don't, the conversation will fail. That's one of the risks. You have to do a risk analysis. What will create failure? And you've got to manage yourself so that you don't create that failure. This is what I'm saying. This is all leadership. You've got to think about your role. You've got to think about your impact in ways that maybe you've never thought about before, because everything you're doing now matters. Your people are going to come through this feeling strong and good because you're enabling them, or they're going to come through it saying, I hate my work, this is even more awful, I'm now terrified I'm going to lose my salary, I've stopped functioning, what's the point? You can make the difference between those two outcomes, but you have to think about it, and you have to use everything that you've got to say, I'm not going to let things fail. I'm not, and you'll make mistakes, obviously, we all make mistakes. There are going to be times when you say, I've really pissed you off. I can recognize that you're really angry with me. That wasn't my intention. Please tell me what I did. Whatever, you have to be the one that's always recovering, because you're noticing that things are not where you need them to be if you're going to survive, if you're going to succeed.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, I mean,
anything else?
I have a second one if we have a time.
Okay, make that
Yep.
quick. Yes, go ahead, Dimitar. And then Slim after you.
Sure. It's more on the technical side, because you said that people's attention, for instance, is they retain 25% of information one-on-one, let's say, per meeting, and in digital it's even less, and so on. Do you see any? And again, it came another Marshall McLuhan quote to my mind, who is quoted saying, "The medium is the message," and there are different technologies last years which are emerging, like virtual reality, augmented reality, and so on, which are still, I mean, they're used, strange enough, mostly for computer games, entertainment, and leisure, you know. But do you see benefit of using those technologies instead of, for instance, what we are doing now? And you know,
Yes, I was involved in a kind of virtual reality learning environment. There was a thing called Second Life with avatars and so on. One of the wonderful things you can do in that environment is you can simulate working on an oil rig. You can take people through something like a disaster recovery. The oil rig is burning, and you can actually simulate it where people say, I'm having some sense of the real experience. It's not the real experience, but it's better than reading a book because we're interacting. So there are environments where that can be really valuable. And I think there are reasons to really think about what can you do again around structuring learning, because what you want there is this multiple variable environment. That's what we live in. Things are always changing around us. We block out a lot of it, but we actually notice most of the environment because it matters to us. You know, we're programmed to survive, so we're more aware of things than maybe we realize. I really don't like technology. One of the things I struggle with is that we're in a world now where people say, we just change the technology and we solve the problem. In my world, so this is how I think and conceive of things, we have to change the behavior. Technology actually does nothing. Technology is just a tool. If we think our tools will, and this is a kind of, you know it from all kinds of environments, people love their kit, they love their tools, they love their gadgets, but technology will not save us. We have to save ourselves. The only thing that is going to make a difference is how we behave, how we think of our world, how we make sense of it, and what we do with that. If I think that I can, just by changing the amount of fuel my car consumes, I don't have to change my behavior, I just change that ratio, I've not solved anything. The problem is still there, we've just lengthened it a little bit. What I have to do is say, what changes in my life do I make to make sure that the impact of what I'm doing disappears? I don't want this impact anymore. What do I do to change that? And that's the fundamentally difficult thing, because most of us are encouraged not to think about how we're behaving. And the last bit is this, that thing I was talking about, countries and so on. The assumption is that we're going to be moving away from a profit-driven capitalist Western dominant model to something which is more collaborative, more peer-driven, more innovation solutions thinking, more communitarian, that we're going to discover, and this is, I think, germane to the Architecture Hub, that we're going to discover that our locality, our cities, our environment, the designed environment in which we live matters far more to us now than it has ever done in the past. We're going to become aware that we can actually design in better ways of living, more satisfying ways of living. And we now know it because we've had an experience where what we took for granted has been disrupted. Am I happy with my flat? No, I hate it because I can't get out. I have no public space. This flat was designed with the idea that there is a park, there is public space that I have access to. I no longer have access to it. This flat is failing me. It's a trap, it's a prison. We're going to be thinking about things in a completely different way because we've experienced them in a way that we never have before. And the point here is we're all doing it simultaneously. This is why it's so powerful. If you were doing this on your own, who cares? But if the whole of Spain is doing this on it together, every Spaniard is going to be saying, I suddenly understand public space in a very different way. I think you like public space, if I remember the public space discussion. I'm only referencing this because there are a whole set of design, social structure, paradigms, assumptions that we've never questioned. We've just taken them for granted. Now we have to sit down and say, in the world that we want to come, what do we need to change? What was failing us? What were we taking for granted? how do we change that to now engineering success? And don't tell me technology, because I'll hit you. It's how do we redesign our relationships? All leadership is all about relationships. And the key in this, if there's one takeaway I want you to really think about is, to be a great leader, you have to understand yourself. You have to have a relationship with yourself that says, I trust myself. I know what I do, why I do it, how I do it. I'm aware of my own drivers. Then you have to say, I'm aware of my relationship with others. Because leadership is all about relationship. You have to have that, because people are going to notice what you're doing. Leadership is about creating a model. It's about creating mirroring. It's about creating transmission. You can be a great leader and people will follow you. They will be influenced by you. They will change the way they think and behave because they've seen you do it, and you may never know them. But in most of our environment, we influence the people we meet, we influence the people we talk with. So you have to say, to be effective as a leader, I have to be aware that I can only do this through relationship. And the only thing that matters is my relationship with others. One of the things that you need to think about for your business is everything can be copied. The only thing you can't copy is a relationship, because it's unique. It's held by the two people or the parties who say, this is our relationship. No one can copy that, because you change one of those actors and the relationship changes. It's something completely different. So you need to think about relationship to yourself, relationship to others, and then you need to think about relationship to the world, if you like, relationship to society. As a little equation I've got, you kind of, the SQ, the social or the spiritual element of what we do. We don't talk about our spiritual side very much in work. I think it's a great shame, because we have to understand our relationship to what is not human, what is not, if you like, a relationship that we hold with each other, but it is a genuine relationship that we hold with our place in the world, with our place in the universe. And the more you reflect on that third element, the more it's going to tell you about what kind of relationship you need with others and what kind of relationship you need with yourself. Those three things are the key to your leadership impact, your charisma, your leadership charisma. And charisma comes in many forms. It can be very still and silent, it can be very dynamic, but it's informed by the way those three things interact with each other. So leadership is relationship.
All right. Sorry, Dimitar, can I ask Salim, because I think we have 6 minutes until 8 o'clock, and anybody who wants to stay after that, depends on Richard if he wants to stay longer, or we could stop at 8 and resume another time. Yes. But I think that Salim has a question. Go ahead. Thank you, Dimitar.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Richard, for the talk. My question was a bit replied on your last words. You were mentioning that we need to build a relationship based on trust. If we are not able to make that, if we are not able to make that trust between us and our co-team, what do you suggest for that? Because I faced some issue with that. So how can we?
I would say, if you really can't create the trust, end the project, because it's going to fail and you're going to lose money and you're going to be in a disaster.
Exactly.
So if you say, I really can't create this trust, exit, because you will lose. If you say, I've got to create trust, you then say, how do I do that? And we keep coming back to psychology. Business is often about, again, kind of tools, systems, and so on. Leadership is about how we relate to each other. It is this issue of how do we join our minds to care and think in new ways. And what psychology tells us is the way you create trust is by asking questions and listening to the answers and listening for truth in the answers. And you hold people to account to say, I've asked you a question, you haven't answered it, please answer the question I've asked. That would be an example, because then the person says, I hear that you're listening to me. You ask a question, you get an answer, and you say, I've heard you say this, that makes me ask this question. So you're showing each other how your minds work. You're creating this very transparent, large surface where you say, what we see is what we get. And so the way to do that is to say to someone, we have a problem. If you're in that environment, I want to sit with you and address this problem. And to do that, actually what we've got to do is not talk about the problem, we've got to talk about our relationship. Why is it that we don't understand each other? Why is it that things go wrong? I see a pattern, or we see a pattern. There's when we look at that pattern, it's actually telling us, it's a symptom, it's telling us these are the problems that are driving the pattern. And that's what I mean when I say you have to really get to the point. You have to be able to say to someone, I'm putting my finger on the point of pain so that we can address the pain. We can't finish until we've got rid of that pain, because if we don't do that, again, we will fail. And we're not used to talking to each other about that, but now we have permission, because it's universal. Everyone is looking at a future where there may be no business future for them, because things are falling apart if we don't act in this new way. Does that help?
Tim, are you okay with that answer? There's no way out. You have to face it, basically.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. Well, it's 2 minutes to 8. Anybody have an intervention or something to ask? But perhaps, Richard, can I ask your permission to, since we couldn't see the presentation, we can send it to send it later by email to everybody? Is that okay?
Yes, I'll send it. I'll send it to you again, and if you can distribute it, and maybe if you want a series of workshops over the next 4 or 5 weeks around these tools, I'm very happy to give it, as I say, but I only want to give it if there is genuine interest.
I think what we can do is we can actually invite people to share specific questions or situations that really bother them, and then we create an event around that.
Yes.
Or unless somebody wants to talk about something right now, so we can prepare it for, and then we'll talk to you about when you're available and how many times a week and when it's going to happen. But if we have any suggestions now, that would be great from anybody on board.
Well, if anyone have a subject.
Yeah, I've put my email on the chat. Please send me an email directly to the email I put on the chat, and I'll send you the information. But Slim, go ahead. Go ahead.
That's all. I want to remind people, if anyone have a suggestion or anything that we want to discuss, just send it to our email, and we can organize that.
Yes, do that, please, and I'll share the information. I really think what Richard is saying is that we do need to change, and correct me, Richard, that there's no way out. And the thing is, at the moment, because we've been used to doing things in a certain specific way, it's just changing in itself is not that easy, is it? That's my own experience. But it's a must. There's no way. We can't go back to the way we were. That's it.
Yes, and it's urgent, because we really are facing systemic immediate. We have to do it tomorrow, not next week. You have to start implementing all of this as fast as you can, and really saying it's permanent. This is our new reality. We have to invest in our relationships. We have to listen to each other. We have to create new bases for trust, new ways of making decisions that look after ourselves. We can no longer.
Exactly. Sorry, talking over you, Richard. That's exactly why I think as everybody here digests this information and they start to marry it with the problems they're facing, or maybe I don't like the word problems, the challenges they're facing right now, and they want to address it, we can actually do like case by case, and that will be like something to create with everybody. Let's say, for instance, I have a problem or a challenge I want to talk to you about. We could discuss that specifically and open it up for people to come in and listen in and learn from that. So I would invite everybody here to do that. Is that okay, Richard?
Yes, yes.
Any ideas
as
from
I say,
anybody else?
I
Sure.
think that would be great. And I also want to just make sure that we talk about these toolkits, because they're really effective. They're very easy to understand, and once you've got them, you can drive extraordinary change very quickly.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much, Richard. Sorry, my husband's on the phone in the background, and so is CNN, working with COVID all the time. So I just want to thank you, Richard, very much for this. It's just like, you're so amazing. Whenever you say something, it's just like really precious. So I've written down a lot of things here. I want to thank you for this. Thank everybody else for coming and joining and sharing their experiences. This is really precious.
Thank you.
If anybody has
Thank you for
something to
being
say,
here.
if they have 1 minute, it's fine. Otherwise, we'll say, Richard, thank you so much. And don't go away too fast. We'll get you back soon. You're in Rwanda now.
I'm in Rwanda. What I would like to say, Amanda, is thanks to you, because I see the effort you put into holding this community and making things work. You've done a huge amount to make this happen with me. So I want to really thank you on behalf of everyone in this meeting, in this session. Without you, it wouldn't happen. So kudos. I'm really, really impressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, if not for people like you and everybody on board, it would be impossible. It's not me, it's everybody here. And the amazing willingness to share.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and have a good night and stay
Richard,
safe.
thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you, guys. We'll meet soon, inshallah. Thank you. Take care then.
Umayma, thanks. You take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.